Hi, everyone. Welcome to our seminar today talking about how your organization can protect its data from cybercrime. I'm Steve Check, CEO of Empyrion Technologies. Joining us on the call today, Taylor McGuire is our service manager, and Mike DePalma from Datto, who is one of our partners that help us deliver solutions to protect your data. So Mike, why don't you just take it away, introduce yourself, and go through the presentation.
All right, thank you so much. So my name is Mike DePalma. I am the Channel Development Manager with Datto. So we are a business continuity solution provider. Our headquarters is in Norwalk, Connecticut, so about 40 miles east of Manhattan, but we do have 22 offices around the world, including a very large presence up in Canada in our Toronto office. Pretty cool story for the entrepreneurs on the call. Our founder started the company when he was 22 years old. Started building these backup devices by hand in his parents' basement back in 2007. You fast forward 8 years to 2015, and the Wall Street Journal gave us a $1 billion valuation. So actually the only unicorn company in the state of Connecticut, which is a privately held technology company. So pretty cool story, basement to billions type story, which is really cool. As we've grown, we're now up actually just today, crossed over the 1,600 employee mark worldwide. And like I mentioned, we do have 22 offices around the world, including our Canadian headquarters, which is based in Toronto. We protect over 500 petabytes of data in our 9 data centers around the world. We've got 2 down in the States, we've got 2 up in Canada. If you're not familiar with the size of a petabyte, because it might be a term you haven't heard, most people know the size of an MP3 file. If you have 1 petabyte of MP3 files, you could play music continuously for 2,000 years. That is the type of data. So it's important to know that, all of that data, anyone that has one of these devices, it is included in our data center, and it stays in the country in which it originates in. So we're going to talk a little bit about business continuity and how it differentiates itself from traditional backup, because I go around, my job, I'm not on the sales team, I'm not on the marketing team. There's 4 of us throughout North America where we go out and we do industry presentations as well as a lot of seminars. I've been fortunate enough to sit on panels with folks from the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, the Secret Service, trying to gather some information so that we can, give as much real information as possible. And I talk to thousands of small businesses, and for the most part, people are backing up their data. They just tend to be using some of those traditional forms of backup, whereas the rest of their internal infrastructure has been upgraded. You think about what you were using 10 years ago as opposed to what you're using now. Backup has really seen a huge evolution over the last 10 years. And so when you look at the traditional forms of backup, this is actually one of the things that the criminals are trying to exploit, because they know that most small businesses are still using traditional forms of file and folder backup, right? You've got some device that's just backing up whatever files and folders you're telling it to. Now, for the most part, these are kind of commoditized products. Not that they don't work well, but a lot of times they're not designed to be protecting business data. You will see higher failure rates. There's a manual aspect to a lot of them, not just with the taking of the backups, but the testing of the backups. I ask folks all the time, how often are you backing up your data? Typically, they can answer that question. When I ask them who's testing that data, you start to get some finger pointing, or they just don't know how often it's being tested. Criminals love that because they know, okay, chances are there was a failure at some point and these folks don't know about it. The key piece is the slow recovery time. This is the question that I ask that a lot of people can't answer. It's great that you are backing up your data. Clearly you need to do that. But how long is it going to take you to get all that data back onto a new piece of hardware if something simple like a server fails, or there is a disaster, there is a fire, or there is a ransomware attack or some sort of criminal attack on your system? How long would it take you to get back down and running? I'll give you some numbers a little bit later on to talk about what the cost of that is, but the criminals really exploit that, as well as just the simple risk of infection or theft. If you've got just one form of backup on premise, you run a lot of risk in terms of that theft possibly occurring. Maybe you have your in-house IT person. I see this all the time. They drive it home on the weekend, and that's where they feel like it's safest. These are, very, very vulnerable to infection or theft. Business continuity looks at things a little bit differently than that traditional form of backup. First and foremost, you have multiple copies of your data. So you've got both the on-premise, but also those 2 data centers I mentioned up in Canada. So you're going to have 3 copies of your data in different geographical locations, which is critical, regardless of what's going on around you, whether it is a ransomware attack or it is one of those natural disasters. You know that there's a safe copy of your data that's available to you. It's also automated. 91% of all data loss and downtime is caused by user error. Typically, this is not somebody maliciously doing so within your organization. It's somebody not knowing what to look out for on these phishing emails and clicking on the wrong attachment or hyperlink or going to the wrong websites at work. We see that all the time. Or simply just deleting a file they weren't supposed to and not figuring out a way to recover that. So you want to make the backups automated in terms of the actual taking of those backups, but the testing as well. Now, the way that backup has evolved is really shifted from just the file and folder level backup to a true image-based backup, which means it's an entire snapshot of that server. So it doesn't just capture the files and the folders, it captures the operating system, the applications, literally everything that lives on that server now lives on that on-premise device and then is subsequently sent up to those data centers. So you're not missing any volumes, but ultimately what this allows us to do is to virtualize. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute, but essentially what it means is before you even start thinking about that restoration process, we're able to virtualize that server that had been backed up on that on-premise device to make sure that first and foremost, your business is back up and running. And then you start worrying about doing some forensics on that server that failed or was infected, or then you start worrying about that restoration. First and foremost, let's reduce that downtime. Let's make yourself get back up and running. Now, we see a lot of studies out there about the impacts of natural disasters. Down here in the States, FEMA put out a study this year around hurricane season that said that 60% of businesses that are impacted by a natural disaster never reopen their doors. We see that all the time. So when people think of why they need to back up their data, it is because of these type of storms. But these actually only make up about 3% of all data loss and downtime. The vast majority, again, comes down to user error. PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study 2 years ago. 71% of small businesses that are down for a week or more close their doors within 12 months. And a lot of these, again, are caused by simply somebody in the office not doing what they were supposed to do. You may have heard the story about Hawaii last year. There was an alert that went out to every resident of Hawaii saying that there was an imminent attack coming. A missile was on its way. It turned out to be a false attack. Now, this poor guy was the actual in-house IT guy that got blamed for it, even though it wasn't his fault. But so his picture's on the front page of every paper down here, right? The funniest part about this was that this is the in-house IT guy. This is the guy you go to. What does he have? A sticky note with his password on it, right on the front page of USA Today. This is the in-house IT guy. So even in-house IT guys tend to make mistakes. That's why it is important to look to a third party to try to take a look at your piece, right? We're seeing password protection, super simple stuff. I sit on these seminars with hackers, and they will tell you that there's software solutions out there that could hack a simple password within seconds. We will see that the average, password will be password 1, or maybe folks think, hey, I'm going to get around this by putting an ampersand instead of the A. These software systems will look right over that, and they will have that thing hacked. So another conversation to have beyond the backup piece is to your password security. Are you using multi-factor authentication? Are you using longer passwords? Right now, they're saying you're supposed to be using a 16-digit password. Now, that's pretty aggressive, but as the more digits you add, the lesser chance of it getting hacked, but also updating that password. I've been part of a lot of dark web scans, and you will be shocked to see how many passwords are out there on the dark web right now. You could see it. And a lot of the times, if they can get one of your passwords, they can get access to a lot of different things. The most important one is not your banking password, it is your email password. Because what can they do? They can go in and try to figure out, all they need is your username for your banking password, and then they send an email, they click the, hey, I forgot my password button, they get the email, they're controlling your email, and then they set up their own password and lock you out of it. So these are all extremely, extremely important. Now, again, we see these stories all the time, from the small business level all the way up to the enterprise level, even at the national level. The quote here is that at least one employee will click on anything, and this is true. There are training systems out there. We use it here at Datto. We use a company called KnowBe4. There's sample phishing emails that go out. They look fantastic, and if you happen to click on one, you get sent to a page that says, congratulations, you've just enrolled yourself into an hour-long tech training. Everybody needs to stay diligent, and this is something that, yeah, you will sit through this webinar, and all of a sudden you'll say, yes, I'm going to be very, very well protected from here on in, and then 3 months from now, it's just human nature, you forget about it all, and you go back to your old ways. That's why these educational seminars need to be done, preferably on a monthly basis, but at least on a quarterly basis to make sure everybody is on the same page. Now, I've been giving ransomware-specific presentations for about 4 or 5 years now, all over the world. And 4 or 5 years ago, you get a couple of head nods. A lot of people looking at their phones. Maybe they have their laptops open. They're kind of paying attention, but hey, it's not something that happens to me. I read it in the paper, and it's a university or a hospital that gets hit. As the time has gone on, we have more and more head nods or hands raised when I say how many people have been impacted, whether they've been impacted or a client or a vendor, or simply they just saw more stories that relate to their industry. And then it all came to a head in May of 2017 when we saw the WannaCry attack. Now, this was the largest single-day, single-virus ransomware attack we'd ever seen. Single virus impacted 220,000 networks around the world. 150 countries were impacted. Now, we've never seen anything to this scale, but what was interesting was these guys only asked for $300 for their ransom payment. Normally what they do is they want to gather some information up front about your business so they know how much money they could ask you for. If it's a Fortune 500 company, well, they're going to ask for 6 or 7 figures. If it's a one-man nonprofit, they might ask for $800. This variant didn't do any of that. They just wanted to see how many networks they could impact. So they actually only netted $300,000, which might seem like a lot of money, but about $1 billion with a B changed hands last year, according to the FBI, between the business community and these ransomware criminals alone. And so we in the IT space, we said, okay, this is probably phase 1 of a 2-phase attack. First phase, let's see how many of these networks we can impact. Second phase, let's figure out how to monetize this, right? So we're going out and we're doing these presentations, trying to educate the business community. Now, I was in right outside of Philadelphia last year, actually 2 years ago, right about 2 weeks after this attack. And I was presenting alongside a gentleman from the FBI, actually the head of the cybersecurity unit in the Philadelphia office. And I go do my presentation. I finish with WannaCry. It's obviously the hot button topic of the day. The FBI agent gets up and he starts telling all these really scary stories, right? Cyber warfare and hacktivism and all these things. He finishes with WannaCry as well because obviously he's on the front page of every paper. He says, in my office, we have 2 theories. One is exactly what Michael just said, probably phase 1 of a 2-phase attack. So we're out there trying to figure out, okay, what vulnerabilities were exploited, trying to educate the business community. That's why this gentleman was out there at this conference. And he said, but we have a second theory. And at the time he gave this theory, it was a little far-fetched. But as the months went on, I think there was a lot of validity to it. And the second theory was that $300,000 they made was just gravy. Their real goal was this. They wanted to be on the front page of every paper. They wanted to be the front story on every website. They wanted the world to be scared of this second phase that was coming. And why did they want to do that? Simply put, they wanted to increase the cost of Bitcoin. Now, at the time, Bitcoin was something that some people were aware of, some savvy investors, some tech people. It's an online, anonymous cryptocurrency. Now, why it was important to the criminals was this. Ransomware's been around 30 years. First known attack was 1989. We had seen a couple here and there, but then really we started to see a huge spike in ransomware attacks around 2014, 2015-ish. And that was because these criminals realized they could marry this very easy delivery system. Normally, ransomware comes as an email with an executable attachment or a hyperlink. They can marry that with Bitcoin, this anonymous cryptocurrency. So they're not asking for money via credit card or ACH payment because that can get tracked back to them, right? They wanted to make sure they can never get caught. So they've been accumulating Bitcoin by the millions when a Bitcoin was $50, $100. They were asking for 99.9% of the time these ransom payments were requested via Bitcoin. So as you could see, Bitcoin had been pretty stable from its existence, right? Pretty flat. You can see a little blip here and there, and it opened up in 2016 about $440, just under $1,000 to kick off 2017. And then you saw this first huge spike, right? When was that? Well, that was June, July of 2017. Because what we saw happening was all these organizations, a lot of very large corporations, started gobbling up a lot of Bitcoin because they were preparing for the second phase that everybody was telling was coming. And yes, they wanted to have all these protections in place to make sure that they didn't get attacked, and they wanted to hope that that never occurred. But worst case scenario, they knew they needed to have Bitcoin on hand. Because this is not like walking into your local bank and saying, hey, I need $250,000 worth of Bitcoin. That's not how it happens. It could take several days, if not more, to get that funded. And then in that little bit of time, the price changes so much that you might need to overfund it. So they wanted to be prepared. And so like anything else, the markets followed. That started driving the cost up. Then everybody got on board, and we saw that crazy bonanza in Q4 of 2017, where it spiked at close to 20,000 US dollars, and it actually opened up in 2018 at around 15,000. Right now, it sits at about 9,000. And so whether that second theory was right or wrong, whether that was their intention or not, the reality was, yes, you saw the stories of the 20-year-old kid who became a millionaire overnight because he bought Bitcoin when he was 16, or the savvy investor who did the same thing. The reality was the folks that were making hundreds of millions of dollars in Q4 of 2017 were the criminals, because they had gathered all this Bitcoin for years and years. And it shows you, excuse me, the sophistication of these guys. This is no longer the guy in his basement anymore doing these hacks who doesn't have to get a real job. This is what organized crime has shifted to. Here in North America, out in Eastern Europe, in Russia and China, they know there's so much money to be made with so little risk of getting caught. And to further kind of show that, you look at the variants of ransomware out there. You'd see a couple pop up. In 2013, we started to see a spike. These are the most prevalent variants of ransomware. Now, there's millions of variants out there. And so there's new ones popping up every single hour around the world, trying to stay ahead of all the technology and the authorities. And that really, when we saw that spike, it was when they figured out that they could tie this to Bitcoin. And so I mentioned the $1 billion number. That's the number that actually changed hands. Last year, it's estimated that about $75 billion was the true impact of these ransomware attacks. So what makes up this number? Well, this includes the cost of downtime and the cost of data loss and the cost of those folks that have gone out of business based on those statistics I gave a little earlier. And I could sit here and give you acronyms all day long, but the two that are important to this conversation and the two that the criminals are very well aware of are your RPO and your RTO. And if I were to ask you to do one thing after this webinar, go back and take a look and see if you and your organization can answer these two questions, because this is what the criminals are trying to exploit. First, the star on the left, that's your RPO, recovery point objective. This one's pretty easy. How much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? You backing up daily? Well, you run the risk of losing a day's worth of data, and that might be fine. Maybe you need to do it hourly. Bottom line is everybody has a different RPO goal and schedule. Now, most people are backing up data, as I mentioned, and yes, the caveat is you have to be testing your data, but for the most part, the businesses that I talk to feel pretty confident in this. They're backing up their data. They're not necessarily worried about never getting their data back. It's more of a matter of how long it's going to take you, and that's where we get to the right-hand side of the screen, your RTO, recovery time objective. That's how much downtime would you absorb if your systems would go down. How long would it take you to get not only that data back, but get it into a production environment so you can get your business back up and running? Would that be 2 days? Would that be 2 weeks? Most people can't answer that question. And then even when you can answer that question, you have to ask yourself, okay, how much is that going to cost me? If I'm down for 2 days, what is that actual cost? Because these criminals, they want to price this ransom payment at a price that's more attractive than the cost of your downtime. So they're going to say, okay, pay me $2,500. Or your other option is go ahead, try to restore and be down for a week. And now that week is going to far exceed the cost of that $2,500, and that's why so many people pay. And particularly, that's why the small business community is most affected by this, because they can't absorb that downtime. Now, to talk about some of the sophistication of these guys and talk about how advanced they are, everybody's heard of the Internet of Things. Everything's connected nowadays, right? You may or may not have heard about last year the greatest casino heist ever pulled. This is at a casino out in Las Vegas, and it wasn't the cool guys sneaking through the elevator vents or dressing up in disguises or any of that. That's not how crime is done anymore. You don't see as many bank robberies with a guy with a ski mask coming in with guns. It's a lot of times done at the cyber level. And what these criminals were able to do was they found a vulnerability, and that vulnerability was in the fish tank for the thermometer that was connected to the internet and connected to their server. And they found that vulnerability. And what they were able to do is they were able to gain access to the server, and they were able to steal all of the high roller information, all their personal information that's worth tens of millions of dollars on the dark web. They go down the dark web and they say, hey, I just got the information of a 54-year-old millionaire, and here's all the information you need. I'm going to sell this off to you for $20,000 or whatever they want to do. And then they move on to their next hack. And then the following, just like a corporate structure, that next layer goes in and says, okay, I just bought this information. I'm going to go utilize it and try to extract as much money as possible. Again, it has become a corporate structure. There are even places on the dark web where there is tech support, true story, for these type of attacks. This is how big it's gotten. And to try to put that dollar value, and there's a million different stories you could utilize, but to try to put a dollar value on it, there's some real life stories where you could see exactly what this cost of downtime was. There's been ransomware attacks all over the world. I picked the city of Atlanta because we have hard facts. This happened last year. They were asked for $52,000. In terms of the city of Atlanta, that's not even a huge amount of money, but government policy is you don't pay the ransom. You don't want to embolden these criminals. You could be really funding a terrorist organization if you do fund it. So they didn't pay. And a couple weeks afterwards, a story came out that was confirmed by the city that they had already spent $2.7 million trying to remediate this problem. All their systems were down. They couldn't get access to the criminal database. Criminals love this attack, right? Because they were able to go around undetected. So that was the number that was already reported. Now they went back to the city several months later and said, we actually need another $9.5 million. So their total impact from this $52,000 ransomware ask was $12 million. And that's what makes up that $75 billion that we talked about. That's what it's that ripple effect of all the different things that happen when you're hit with ransomware. And to give you some scale to this, because these are large numbers, the entire IT budget for the city of Atlanta was $35 million. A third of it went towards just this attack alone. And so we do ransomware studies every single year. We have one for US, we have one for Canada, we've got one for Europe. We really dive deep into each individual market. And what we saw across the board is that every single industry is impacted. Again, it used to be 10 years ago, the people that were getting attacked were the large organizations that had very valuable data, right? Now, they don't care what your data is. With ransomware, they're just encrypting it. And all they're relying upon is that regardless of your industry, you can't operate without access to that data. So it allows them to cast this really large net. Now, only less than a quarter of these attacks are being reported to authorities, mostly because, these authorities aren't going to catch any of these guys anyway, and the goal is just to get back up and running. But beyond that, it's the impact to your reputation. You don't want to be known as that company in your industry and in your area that has been infected, right? It's just some conceptions about what that is. And all of a sudden, if I'm a competitor, I'm going to say, hey, did you see that attorney's office down the street? Yeah, they got impacted by ransomware. We're very secure. So people want to hold that close to the vest. And again, the cost of that downtime always exceeds, in our report, 10 times higher. That's where we keep going. This is the leverage that they have. And so regardless of your industry, just go to your national organization or your local organization. They're always going to have their tips for cybersecurity. Some of them are very basic. Keep your system up to date, right? Make sure all your patching is up to date. Those password audits, very, very, very critical and inexpensive to do. Really simple. Make sure that everybody's trained. Back up your critical files. That's clear. But most importantly, have and develop and document a cyber attack response plan. If your fire alarm went off right now, everybody would know where to go. If you got hit with that scary red screen that says you got impacted, would you know what to do? I could tell you at my last job before I came to Datto, if I got that scary red screen, I wouldn't want to walk down the hall and tell my boss. I'd try to handle it myself, right? I would have a panic attack and maybe call my buddy down the hall and say, hey, can you come help me? And the longer that I tried to do that and didn't isolate my machine, the more systems that's going to impact and migrate itself to. So everybody should know. Every employee should know what happens. What happens if that were to occur? Who do I call? What do I do with my machine? Simple stuff like this. And then continuously train your staff to understand that. Remember, the idea here is eliminate that downtime. So we talked about some of the differences between traditional backup and business continuity. Well, how does business continuity help to fight this cost of downtime? Well, I mentioned the hybrid solution, right? You've got the on-premise as well as replicating to those two data centers. That's key. What's going on around you, you've got access to your data. You also want to make it automated. I mentioned those user error statistics. Tell the folks at Empyrion exactly what you need for your RPO. Is it hourly? Okay, that's what I'm backing up my device back at my home office, hourly during business hours. That's fine with me. Okay, that's enough. And then every one of those backups is automatically tested. There's no user involvement. It's automatically tested both locally and to make sure that that offsite sync occurred. Now, hopefully you get all these pretty green dots, but maybe there is an X in there. Maybe one of those backups did fail. Well, now you're going to get an alert and you could be proactive about it. And you don't find out that those backups failed 3 months down the road when you get impacted. You know proactively. And then when we talk about that image base, taking a snapshot of the entire piece, just look at what a file and folder backup really does. For the most part, it does its job. You tell it which files and folders to back up. Now, ultimately, you can be missing a volume on there or people are saving it to the wrong folder. But, okay, let's assume that that's fine. Image-based solution, you don't have to worry about that. Everything is captured. Now, just look at that restoration process. If you have a file and folder backup, that's all you have. You have your files and folders. So if you're trying to restore, before you do anything, you get a new piece of hardware in place, you've got to install the operating system, the applications. Now you're ready to bring all those files over, which again could be painstaking. With an image-based backup, because everything that already exists on that device, you do what's called a bare metal restore, and everything comes over all at once, so that that new piece of hardware looks and operates exactly like the old one. And this could be done to dissimilar hardware. But also what it allows us to do is once that base image is taken and all that information is gathered on that first image, from there on in, we're not taking full base images. We're doing what's just called block level incremental changes. So we're just seeing which changes occurred between those backups. And it gives us the ability to have what's called inverse chain technology, which means every one of those backup points is now independent of one another. So if you're hit with ransomware at 11 o'clock, you know that 10 o'clock backup is not going to be impacted. So you could take that time machine back to 10 o'clock. And what this ultimately gives us the ability to do is virtualize. And this is critical. So if this represents your server and somebody gets that scary red screen, since everything that lived on that server lives on this on-premise device, we'd spin up what's called a virtual machine, meaning that this on-premise device is now operating as your server. It's business as usual. Before you even start that restoration process, before you even start any forensics on that device to make sure that it was only a ransomware attack and the information was not stolen. First things first, let's get you back up and running. Get your company back up and operating. And then when you're ready, this could be hours or days or weeks. When you're ready to bring that all over, then you start that process, but you could still do so while you're in that virtualized state. So even on the back end, that downtime has been reduced as well. So now we're talking about minutes or hours as opposed to days or weeks to get your systems back up online. You're going to be able to answer those RTO and RPO questions. You know your RPO piece because you set your schedule, and that's all being tested, so you feel very confident about that. But now you could actually answer that RTO question. You know how long you're going to be down because you could test these capabilities and make sure that this is aggressive enough for you. And you have the ability to do that either locally or from either one of those data centers, which is critical. And these capabilities are being tested every single night as well. So what's called screenshot verification. Every single night in the background, virtualization is spun up. It's brought up to a boot screen. There's a snapshot taken of it with a timestamp to say, yes, not only is the data there, but these virtualization capabilities are there as well. So when you come into work on a Monday morning, you know that there's nothing that's going to prevent you from keeping your business running that day, right, and eliminating that downtime. Now, people are also moving to SaaS applications. Here at Datto, we use G Suite. A lot of folks are using Office 365. Should you be backing this up as well? Well, yes, you should. We start looking at the volume of folks that are using O365. They're still the #1 target in terms of phishing attacks. Have you heard of Ransom Cloud? This hasn't made the news that much lately, but it is coming. There's a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mitnick. He was at one point the FBI's most wanted cyber attacker in the world. He did get caught, and he went to jail for hacking for several years. He came out, became one of the good guys. Kind of, you've seen the movie Catch Me If You Can. It's the similar type story. He started working with the government to say how easy it is. We invited him to our national convention, DattoCon, to do a live presentation. He created a virus, a ransomware virus that impacted O365, and he set up 2 computers, and he showed it live on stage. It took him 5 minutes. And what it did was it sent an email. This looks pretty legit. It says his name in there, right? Looks like it's coming from Microsoft. All you got to do is update your Anti-Spam Pro. Looks pretty legit. Here's all I need you to do. Most people are going to look at this and say yes. And then all of a sudden you click on that button. Everything in your entire domain is now encrypted. And the only email you could open is this pretty red box that says pay me my money in Bitcoin. So this is coming. We see much more on the on-premise Windows-based servers just because there's still so much low-hanging fruit. But let's not lull ourselves into a false sense of security. They will follow the data wherever it lives. These criminals are smart. So once that dries up on that on-premise stuff, they will follow it, and that is coming. And so ultimately, regardless of where your data lives, you want to make sure that you can take care of the lost data side of things, but also that downtime side of things as well. If you could do that, you really take away both pieces of leverage that these criminals have. And that way you know that your company's up and running, and you don't have to go out and buy Bitcoin and hope that it doesn't change, and you don't have to pay these folks. Because if you do, you're also going to put a bigger bullseye on your back. It's like the bully in the cafeteria. You give them money on day one, they're going to keep asking for it until you stop paying. And that's what these criminals will do as well. So I do want to open it up to any questions. There is a chat box. If anybody wants to ask any questions, you could do that. We will answer as many as possible. Steve, Taylor, do you have anything to add before we get to Q&A?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. Very informative. I hope that everybody on the call today understands, a lot of the technical information. That's what we're here to do, Empyrion, to help you navigate that world. Obviously, we deal a lot with a lot of small businesses, and I think that, the one mindset a lot of people would have as a small business is that they'll never attack me. And I think you've clearly shown that everybody is at risk. So thank you very much for walking us through that. One of the common questions I always get is around that Office 365 piece. I think a small business looks at putting their data in the cloud because they feel it's protected there, and I think you've addressed that very well as well. So thanks I think you did a really great job on explaining that. Moving forward, I guess a couple action items from our perspective. Any questions around the material presented today, both Taylor and myself are available to answer those questions. You can call us. Numbers on the screen embedded in the presentation here. Email sales@empyrion.net. And our thanks for joining the conversation today. If you want to engage us on further discussion about image-based backup, SaaS backup, we are actually offering a promotion of a 1 month free on any new business continuity services. And so we look forward to being in touch, answering your questions, and helping you navigate the conversation. So that's it for me, Taylor. I don't know if you want to add anything to that conversation.
No, that's great, Michael. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. And if anyone has any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be reaching out to people over here over the next couple of days.
Yeah, and if I were to encourage one thing, at least just give Steve and Taylor a call and have them take a look at what you have and see if you could answer that RTO and RPL. You very well might be covered, but unless you get a second set of eyes on there and take a look at your systems, you really can't be sure. So at a minimum, at least just let them come out and then take a look and see what you have, and let them, give their advice on that. But I want to thank you for including us. Any questions, obviously feel free to reach out. This has been recorded, so you could share it with anybody in your office.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike, again. And just for those listening, we do have a draw. Everybody that did attend the presentation, we're going to do a draw for a $100 prepaid Visa gift card. So we'll do that offline, and we'll notify you via an email if you've won that. So thanks again. Thanks, everyone, for checking in, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Have a great rest of your day.